Today's lesson is borscht from Ukraine with love. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And my name is Helen.
Merry Christmas, everybody. Hopefully you had a wonderful holiday yesterday. And, of course, if you're full of holiday food, you might want to try something else for a change. And so we're going to talk about something called borscht. Borscht, okay? Have you heard of this dish before, Helen?
Yes, I have, and I've tried it before. I really like it. It's a very tasty, light soup, and it's very particular to Russia. And we're going to talk about that today, how it's made, its history, and also what it represents.
Indeed, and I don't recall ever having this myself when I was growing up. I may have had it, I don't remember, but in any case, I'm not quite sure if it's available here in Taiwan. Somebody must make it and serve it in a restaurant. If you know, let us know. But let's find out all about borscht right now. Let's listen to the first part, and then we'll come back to discuss it.
Borscht. From Ukraine with love. If you ask someone what food most represents Russian cuisine, chances are they'll say borscht. This beetroot soup, with its deep red color and pleasing combination of sour, savory, and sweet flavors, reminds one of Mother Russia almost as readily as a set of nesting dolls or St. Basil's Cathedral. But in fact, borscht is a Ukrainian dish, and it wasn't originally made with beetroot at all.
大家好，第一部分我们可以看到单字 cuisine， 这个字是名词，指的是一国或地区的烹饪菜肴。例如 This method of noodle making is primarily used in Italian cuisine. 这种制面方式主要用于意大利料理。或者 Thai cuisine consists of many different elements. 泰国菜是由许多不同元素而组成的。接着我们看到形容词 savory，它的意思是咸味的或是美味可口的。举例来说 Chinese Sichuan cooking has a number of famous savory dishes. 中国四川料理中有一些知名的咸香菜肴。又或者说 The hostess set out several savory snacks for her guests. 女主人端出多道可口点心招待客人。
If you ask someone what food most represents Russian cuisine, chances are they'll say borscht. So this first sentence poses a question. If you were to ask somebody what represents Russian cuisine, and by cuisine, we mean the particular style of cooking. In this case, the particular style of cooking of Russia. You can also say Chinese cuisine, Italian cuisine, or you can talk about the cuisine of southern France if you're talking about the style of cooking of a particular region. So if you were to talk about Russian cuisine, chances are that the person you're talking to will say borscht. So chances are this phrase refers to something that is likely to happen. It's likely that they'll say borscht. So you can also say chances are that it will rain today.
Or if you ask someone what food represents Japan, chances are they'll say sushi. What food represents Mexico, chances are they'll say tacos, etc., etc. And if somebody asks you, well, what do you think of when someone says Russian food? Well, you'll say borscht. Okay, that's probably the most common kind of food that you find in Russia. And this beetroot soup, with its deep red color and pleasing combination of sour, savory, and sweet flavors, reminds one of Mother Russia almost as readily as a set of nesting dolls or St. Basil's Cathedral. That's a long sentence, so let's break it down. First of all, we're talking about borscht. What is it? Well, it's a kind of soup and it's made with beetroot, sometimes just shortened to beets. And, of course, they have a deep red color, and they have a pleasing combination of flavors. They're sour, they're savory, and, of course, they're sweet as well. This, of course, is not referring to the beetroot itself, but to the soup, the flavors in the soup. So, yes, it's going to be sour and savory. Now, savory, that means kind of salty and spicy at the same time, right?
Right. Savory is a word that refers to the saltiness of something, but it's not just saltiness, because if you wanted to say that something is salty, you would just say salty. Savory is a little bit more complex than that. It's salty with some spices added to it, but not spicy as in hot chili peppers. Spicy like adding cinnamon, nutmeg, or other flavorings that would add to the flavor of that particular food.
Okay, so of course, if you hear the word borscht, or if you're presented with a bowl of borscht, you'll be reminded of Mother Russia, okay? So if you're from Russia, of course, you may refer to the motherland, your home country of Russia, which of course is really, really big. And of course, people in Russia love their country, and they love their food and their drink and their customs and their music and stuff like that. And it will remind a person of Mother Russia almost as readily, or almost as easily, or as soon as a set of nesting dolls or St. Basil's Cathedral. Those, of course, are some iconic symbols of Russia. That cathedral is a big church, I believe, in Moscow. And then those nesting dolls, of course, are quite common. There's one doll inside of another, inside of another, inside of another. You get the idea.
Yes, and here we have the term Mother Russia because there are actually a lot of Russian immigrants in America and in other countries outside of Russia. So sometimes these immigrants might get homesick and they think about their mother country, Mother Russia, and having a bowl of borscht is a reminder of their home, of their motherland, or Mother Russia.
Okay, and the last sentence of the first paragraph reads, but in fact, borscht is a Ukrainian dish and wasn't originally made with beetroot at all. So if you're from Ukraine, you might stop people and say, hey, wait a minute, that's not from Russia. It actually comes from Ukraine. And this happens a lot with different kinds of food. Some people think a certain kind of food is from that country. Oh yeah, pizza, that's American food, right? No, it comes from Italy. America just kind of changed it a little bit, etc., etc. And you can probably think of examples all over the place. But yeah, you need to know this for sure. It's actually a Ukrainian dish, and they didn't actually use beetroot at all at the beginning. Things change over time. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the second part.
The exact origin of borscht is unknown, but the consensus is that it was first made in Ukraine sometime between the 5th and 9th centuries. It was originally made with cow parsnip, otherwise known as hogweed, whose fermented stems, leaves, and flowers gave the dish its sour taste. Indeed, the word borscht even derives from the Slavic word borshchevik, which means hogweed. This early soup was a humble meal that was eaten by peasants and looked down on by nobles.
第二部分我们看到单字 consensus， 这个字是名词，意思是共识或是一致看法。例如 The consensus of the class was that we have our outing at the local park. 全班的共识是我们在当地公园郊游。或是 After a 5-hour meeting, the stockholders have finally reached a consensus. The CEO will be terminated, effective immediately. 经过5小时的会议，股东们终于达成共识，执行长免职，立即生效。接着我们看到单字 otherwise， 它是副词，指的是在其他情况下或是以别的方式。例如 Mary has a minor cough, but is otherwise healthy. Mary 有轻微咳嗽，但其他方面都很健康。或者我们可以说 All of the sales clerks are helping customers or otherwise busy. 所有的店员都在协助顾客或有别的事在忙。接下来我们看到名词 stem， 指的是植物的梗、茎或是杆。举例来说 The stem of the rose has many thorns, so be careful when you hold it. 玫瑰茎部有很多刺，所以拿着时要小心。 又或者说 Lester pulled a grape from the stem, threw it into the air, and caught it in his mouth. Lester 把一颗葡萄从茎部拔下来，丢到空中，然后用嘴巴接住。再来我们看到单字 derive， 它是动词，意思是起源于或是来自。我们可以说 Many different medicines are derived from plants. 许多不同的药品是源自于植物。也可以说 Wanda wears perfume derived from flowers. Wanda 喷了从花萃取制成的香水。
So now we're going to look at borscht and its history. Now, the exact origin of borscht is unknown, but the consensus is that it was first made in Ukraine sometime between the 5th and 9th centuries. So people don't really know where borscht came about or when exactly, but there is a consensus about its origin. Now, the word consensus refers to an agreement among a group of people about something. So I could say, for example, there are certain issues for which people just can't reach a consensus, or for which people just can't agree upon. Or I could also say they made the decision by consensus.
Indeed, most people don't know exactly where borscht came from, but they generally most people believe that it came from Ukraine sometime between the 5th and 9th centuries. And it was originally made with cow parsnip, otherwise known as hogweed, whose fermented stems, leaves, and flowers gave the dish its sour taste. So at the very beginning, it was made with cow parsnip, which is also known as hogweed. So cow parsnip, hogweed, they're the same thing. And if you talk about two different things that have the same name, you could use this word otherwise. That also happens when you're making a choice. You know, if it's nice weather, we'll go hiking in the mountains. Otherwise, we'll stay home if it rains.
Right. So otherwise can also be described as differently or in another way. So I could say students should not text, make phone calls, or otherwise use their cell phones in class. So cow parsnip is otherwise known as hogweed. So how is hogweed used to make borscht? So you ferment the stems and leaves and the flowers. And fermenting is a kind of cooking process. When you ferment food, you cause a chemical change to happen to that food so that the sugar in the food turns into alcohol. Another example of fermented foods is stinky tofu. Stinky tofu is fermented, and that's how the tofu gets its very, very strong and pungent taste.
Yeah, various foods go through fermentation. That's the process, and the verb is to ferment. So we've got stems, leaves, and flowers, and they all give the dish its sour taste. So again, a plant has many parts. Of course, you've got the leaves of the plant, which you can cut off and use to make tea or things like that. And it's also got flowers, which the bees come to pollinate. And then we've got stems. A stem, of course, is kind of like the trunk of a plant. If you think of a tree, well, the thick part in the middle is the trunk. And the same goes for plants, except it's not as thick as a trunk. So we call that part of a plant the stem, the middle part.
Right. And indeed, the word borscht even derives from the Slavic word borshevik, which means hogweed. So if you look at the word borscht itself, you have a clue as to how it was originally made. So it was originally made with hogweed and not with beetroot.
Indeed. So we've got the word derive here, and that happens all the time when things have an origin and they later kind of change, but we still have the same word. For example, a lot of Japanese kanji are derived from Chinese characters. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're a little different. So when we talk about something that is based on something else and then the modern version is kind of changed, but sort of the same thing, then we use the the word derive. So that word borscht derives or comes from the Slavic word bolshevik, which means hogweed. Now, this early soup was a humble meal that was eaten by peasants and looked down on by nobles. Peasants, of course, are people who work on farms. They're also called serfs, S-E-R-F, serf. And, of course, we don't really use that term anymore. It's kind of an old term to talk about medieval Europe mostly, but in other countries as well. Again, poor farmers. And if you're looked down on, well, people think they're superior to you. So the nobles or the rich people, the lords and the ladies, the dukes and the earls, and people like that went, we're not going to eat that because only poor slobs eat that kind of stuff. How vulgar.
Right. So when you look down on something, you're basically thinking that that thing isn't good enough for you. So in a more modern sense, you can say, Tiffany looked down on the birthday present that her boyfriend gave her because it wasn't expensive enough. Now, that's not very nice of Tiffany because her boyfriend has spent a lot of time making that present, which is worth a lot more than what you would spend on buying it. So nobles had a tendency to look down upon peasants. A noble is somebody who belongs to the highest social class. And back then, when you're a noble, it doesn't mean you have a lot of money. It just means you were born into a particular family that was considered of a higher social class than the other social classes in that society.
Right. A related phrase to looked down on is look down one's nose at someone. It means the same thing. It means you're kind of being snobby and you think you're superior to other people. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's listen to the third and final part.
Eventually, however, borscht changed, and so did the attitudes of the nobility toward it. The soup spread farther afield and became especially popular in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. When an economic decline arrived there in the 17th century, nobles became more willing to try simple foods they had once avoided.
最后第三部分我们看到名词 decline， 它指的是衰退、衰落或是下降。举例来说 War and famine are two major reasons a civilization falls into decline. 战争与饥荒是一个文明会衰落的两个主要原因。又或者是 The company has been experiencing a sharp decline in share prices since last November. 自去年11月以来，该公司的股价一直在急剧下跌。
So in the past, the nobles looked down on borscht because they thought that it was a food for the peasants. But eventually, borscht changed, and so did the attitudes of the nobility toward it. The soup spread farther afield and became especially popular in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So eventually, the reputation of borscht changed. The nobility or noble people began eating it and thought that it was good enough for them. And the soup also spread to other countries. It spread farther afield. Afield here means far away, especially far away from where you presently are. So I could also say, as an example, as the baby tigers grew bigger, they began to wander further afield from their mother.
Indeed. Okay, so it goes on to say the soup spread farther afield, it spread all over the place, and became especially popular in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And when an economic decline arrived there in the 17th century, nobles became more willing to try simple foods they had once avoided. So, of course, if you talk about an economic decline, we're talking about when the economy is not doing well. Some people also refer to this as a recession, and if it's really bad, then it's a depression.
Right, and you can use decline in other contexts as well. It means a decrease in the quantity or the quality of something. So you could also say a decline in the company's production if the company has begun to produce less or fewer goods.
Right, and decline, of course, can be both a noun and a verb. We could talk about the decline of the Roman Empire, or we could also say, over time, the Roman Empire declined in power and influence, and it eventually disappeared. But here, of course, we've got an economic decline that took place in the 1600s or the 17th century, and the nobles there were getting hungry, and so they became less and less snobby, so they decided to actually try some foods that the humble peasants enjoyed. Gee, I don't want to starve to death. I like being snobby and stuff like that. I like to look down on those people, but I got to eat. I don't want to starve to death, so I guess I'll lower myself and try that soup that the peasants are eating. And they tasted it, and they thought, oh, what have we been missing all these years?
That's right, and that just shows you that a lot of the delicious foods we eat today come from humble origins. Roger had mentioned pizza in the beginning. So pizza is well loved today. Everybody eats pizza. But actually it was a poor man's invention. When there wasn't any meat or anything nutritious to eat, they just put something together with flour, water, and tomatoes, and they created something exceptionally delicious.
Indeed, and it would be interesting to find out what sort of Taiwanese dishes have a similar origin. They began with the humble peasants, and now they are enjoyed by everybody in society, including the rich. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion about borscht for today. Let's now listen to Hanny, our beloved Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第2部分一开始写到，罗宋汤真正的起源并不可考，但共识是它最早是在5世纪到9世纪之间于乌克兰做出来的。文中是用单字 consensus 来表达共识，那它是来自动词 consent C-O-N-S-E-N-T。 好，那我们来学它的字首字根。当我们看到 S-E-N-T 或是 S-E-N-S 或是拼作 S-E-N-S-E 这一类字根呢，它就带有知觉啊、感觉或是认为的意思。那在 consent 这个字当中， C-O-N 表示共同，字根 S-E-N-T 表示感觉。对某事有共同相同的感觉，有共同的看法，应该很容易联想到 consent 它有同意、赞成的意思。那么它的名词 consensus 就表示共识、一致看法。我们顺便补充有相同字根的单字，第一个是 dissent， 它的字首 D-I-S 表示不同，字根 S-E-N-T 是感觉或是认为。那有不同的感觉、不同的看法，应该可以联想到 dissent 它有不同意的意思，而它当动词呢，就是指公开反对；当名词是指异议，就是不同或反对的意见。好，在第二个补充的是 resent， 它的字首 R-E 是做强调用，字根 S-E-N-T 是感觉。那么当感受非常强烈，尤其是那种负面的情绪非常强烈，我们就可以用这样的方式去联想 resent 它有怨恨、感到愤恨的意思，那就是当动词来用。第三个补充的是 sentiment， 它的字根 S-E-N-T 表示感觉， M-E-N-T 是名词字尾，合在一起 sentiment 表示感想啊、观点、意见、情绪、心情等等，后面加上形容词字尾 A-L 变成 sentimental， 那就是形容是感性的、多愁善感的或是感伤的。好，那我们接着读到课文第3部分的第一句，他说 Eventually, however, borscht changed, and so did the attitudes of the nobility toward it. 然而最终罗宋汤产生了变化，贵族阶层对它的态度也有了改变。那文中是用 so did 来附和前面的句子去表达也怎么样。我们其实也可以把后半句改写成 and the attitudes of the nobility toward it changed to， 用 to 去表达也怎么样怎么样的语义也可以哦。好，那我们这边是要补充一下以 so 开头的肯定复合句。那它的句型是 so 加上助动词或 be 动词再加主词，其中的 so 在这边是当副词去表达也是。那记得后方的主词跟助动词或是主词跟 be 动词它们要对调来形成倒装。举例来说 Reading is relaxing and so is listening to music。 阅读是很令人放松的，听音乐也是。好，那至于否定复合呢，我们可以用 neither 或者是 neither。好，那它后面是要接助动词加主词，或者是 be 动词加主词，去表达也不怎么样怎么样。像是 Sharon isn't going to the party and neither are we。 Sharon 不会去参加派对，我们也不会。好，那以上今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Cuisine.Seafood is commonly featured in Japanese cuisine. Consensus. The group of friends could not reach a consensus on where to eat dinner. Otherwise. The otherwise graceful dancer suddenly tripped. Stem. The stems of the flowers were cut off and thrown away. Derive. The majority of English words are derived from either Latin or German. Noble. The nobles became the enemies of the queen.Decline. The small town suffered due to the decline of the local steel industry.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoyed reading along with us. I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.